They said the frontier wind could carry secrets if you stood still and listened long enough. But for the young woman named Clara, silence was all she'd ever known. Born without hearing, she lived in a world of soft shapes and trembling vibrations in the ground. She learned early how to read lips, how to understand the emotions that passed through other people's eyes like quick storms. She grew up in a farmhouse at the far reach of the valley, where wheat swayed like golden oceans, and storms rolled across the plains without warning. Her parents tried to love her, though they did not always succeed in understanding her. Money was always thin, and hardship had carved deep lines into their faces long before she was grown. There were whispers that work was scarce and mouths were many, and one day, as the sun dipped blood-red over the fields, a wagon rattled up the road. On that wagon sat a trader, one known for dealing not only in supplies and horses, but in futures too. Futures of young women promised to far-off ranchers who needed helping hands and quiet wives. And Clara's parents, with whispered guilt, agreed to sell her future away. They thought they were saving her life, offering her some hope in a world as harsh as cracked earth. Clara could not hear the bargaining, but she saw it in their eyes, desperation dressed as duty.
She was given a white prairie gown, handed like an offering to a life she never chose. With trembling hands, she packed what little she owned, a worn sketchbook, charcoal pencils, and a single photograph of her family, the only proof they'd ever held her close. As she was lifted onto the wagon, she looked back one last time. Her mother's lips trembled as she mouthed an apology Clara could read but could not answer. The wagon wheels turned, and dust rose like smoke from a dying fire.
If you're captivated already, don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment to support more Wild West tales just like this one. Your support helps us bring the frontier to life. The ranch waiting for Clara was far across the frontier, near Badlands where coyotes howled their hunger into the night. Its owner was an aging man named Harlan Pike, whose bitterness tasted stronger than the liquor he sipped at dawn. He had sent for a bride, not for love, but for labor, for someone to milk the cows, mend the fences, and tend to his failing ranch. When Clara stepped down from the wagon, Harlan's eyes narrowed, surprised by her silence. The trader, eager to leave, offered a shrug and a half-hearted explanation about her being good with chores and quiet as mice.
Harlan signed papers, muttered curses, and led Clara inside. She learned quickly to navigate the ranch's rhythms, feeding horses before dawn, collecting eggs in cold mornings that wrapped her fingers in numbness, mending torn saddles with thread she could barely see in the dim lantern light. Harlan never struck her, but his words were sharp, and Clara could see their shape even without sound. Useless. Slow. Should have asked for another. She smiled anyway, too gentle for the world she'd been given.
In the quiet hours after chores, she would sit on the back porch and draw. She sketched the vast horizon, the mountains like jagged teeth, the horses galloping with dust trailing behind them like the memories she tried not to hold. Art became her language, her only way to shout silently into the world. One evening, as Clara cleaned tack in the barn, her life shifted like a sudden change in the wind. She felt the earth tremble with approaching hooves long before a stranger appeared at the barn door.
He was a cowboy named Elijah Gray, a weathered traveler whose jacket smelled of rain and distant roads. His eyes held kindness that softened the rough lines of his face. He had wandered onto the ranch seeking water for his horse, whose flanks trembled from exhaustion.
Harlan greeted Elijah with suspicion, but allowed him to stay the night in the barn. That evening, Clara brought Elijah a meal, a simple stew and bread. When she placed the bowl before him, he said, "Thank you." Clara smiled faintly, reading the gratitude in his lips. Elijah noticed the silence, the careful way she watched mouths move. Realization dawned, but instead of pity, something like respect lit his gaze. That night, under a sky torn open with starlight, Elijah found Clara on the porch. He tapped his chest gently, then traced the air with slow gestures. She watched. Though she had no formal signs, she could read his intentions. He mimed drawing, and she nodded, handing him her sketchbook shyly. He flipped through pages filled with horses, sunsets, lonely barns, and a single fading family portrait. Every stroke was heavy with longing. Elijah pointed to the family portrait. Clara tapped her chest, then pointed to the house, shaking her head. Sold, not chosen. Elijah's jaw tightened with understanding. Over the next days, whenever Elijah stayed, he found small ways to speak with her, not through voice, but through gestures. He would tap the ground twice when approaching, so she would feel the vibration and not be startled. He showed her simple signs he'd learned from a wandering preacher long ago, and she taught him how emotions could be read through the smallest flicker of eyes. Harlan noticed their connection, jealousy rising like wildfire. He forbade Clara from speaking to the cowboy, his lips forming words like chains. "She's mine, property." Clara lowered her gaze, but inside, embers smoldered. Elijah left the next morning, but promised to return. Clara tried not to hope. Hope was dangerous on a ranch like this. Weeks passed, each day folding into the next like worn pages in a book. Then one evening, as storm clouds bruised the sky, Elijah rode back into the yard. He carried supplies Harlan desperately needed: grain, nails, rope. Harlan swallowed his pride and allowed him to stay a while, though dislike burned behind his eyes. Elijah worked beside Clara, fixing fences and helping mend barns. Their silent glances became conversations, their smiles, paragraphs. When the sun bled red into the horizon, they'd sit near the corral, hands close, but never touching. Elijah would tell stories with gestures and expression alone, tales of ghost towns swallowed by sand, of rivers that glowed beneath moonlight, of people who treated him with warmth, only to vanish like mirages.
Clara listened, her eyes shimmering with yearning. She wanted to see the world he described, to feel their horses pounding across valleys unseen, to breathe air that wasn't stained with regret.
One night, Harlan found them sitting together. His rage erupted. His mouth twisted with fury, shaping words Clara did not need to hear to understand. He accused Elijah of stealing what was his. Elijah stood tall, voice calm, hands open, not threatening, only honest. But Harlan struck him anyway, fist meeting jaw with a crack that Clara felt in her bones. She stepped between them, eyes pleading. Harlan froze, seeing defiance in her gaze for the first time. He spat at her feet, storming back inside. Elijah touched his jaw, wincing, but Clara reached up, brushing his cheek gently. In that moment, silence felt louder than thunder. Days slipped by. The storm passed, but tension remained. Elijah knew he couldn't stay forever. He offered Clara a place beside him, a life beyond fences, beyond angry fists and broken promises. He painted pictures of wild landscapes, where rivers carved poetry into stone, where towns welcomed wanderers with open arms, where silence was not a cage but a companion. Clara's heart twisted with longing. But fear held her back. She knew the frontier was dangerous for a deaf woman. She feared being a burden. She feared the unknown. And she feared Harlan's vengeance.
One evening, Elijah saddled his horse. He told Clara, through hands and eyes, that he would leave at dawn. But if she wished, she could meet him at the forked tree by sunrise. She could choose her destiny.
That night, Clara could not sleep. The wind rattled the shutters like restless spirits. She stared at her sketchbook, flipping through memories she'd drawn. Then she came to the last page, blank, waiting. She sketched a woman riding beneath a vast open sky, hair streaming like banners behind her. A woman free. Tears dotted the page. When dawn's first light brushed the plains, Clara dressed quietly, clutching her sketchbook. She paused at the mirror, seeing the white prairie gown she'd once been offered, not as a gift, but as a transaction. She slipped it on, feeling its weight transform. Now it meant something else entirely. She stepped outside, heart pounding. But Harlan waited on the porch, shotgun in hand. He had seen the tension, the glances. He had guessed. Clara froze, fear spidering up her spine. Harlan's mouth twisted into words of ownership, of threats. Then he pointed the barrel at her chest. Elijah, waitin' by the forked tree, sensed something wrong. He mounted his horse and galloped back toward the ranch, dust spiraling behind him. He rode hard, feeling dread grip his ribs like iron bands. As he reached the yard, he saw Harlan standing over Clara. He shouted, words Clara could not hear, but she saw his lips shaping warning. Harlan swung the barrel toward the cowboy, finger tightening. Elijah dove, tackling Harlan to the ground. The shotgun fired, blasting into the air. Clara stumbled back, hands shaking. The two men grappled, fists and fury tangling like barbed wire. Finally, Elijah disarmed Harlan, tossing the weapon aside. He stood over him, chest heaving, refusing to strike again. Harlan snarled curses, but Clara stepped forward. She pressed her hand to her chest, then pointed at the horizon. Choice. Freedom. Elijah nodded. He offered his hand. Harlan spat at the ground, broken pride in his eyes. He muttered a final warning, but he did not rise. Clara climbed onto Elijah's horse, desperation and hope warring within her. With a sharp kick, they rode toward the forked tree and beyond, leaving the ranch and its ghosts behind. The frontier was not gentle. Wind lashed them. Roads stretched endless, and fear followed like a shadow. But Elijah always tapped twice on the ground when approaching. Always pointed out beauty she might have missed. The shimmer of moonlit rivers,
the flutter of prairie birds rising like prayer.
They reached a small town nestled by mountains, where kind people welcomed travelers. Elijah worked as a horse trainer. Clara sold sketches at the bustling market. Folk came not for pity, but to marvel at the emotion captured in her lines. In time, she learned to sign more formally, fingers dancing with meaning. Elijah learned with her, patient and eager. Their hands spoke volumes, jokes, stories, confessions whispered without sound.
One evening, under a sky blazing with sunset fire, Elijah knelt. He traced one word in dirt, forever. Clara nodded, eyes shimmering like silvered lakes. She signed, yes. Their embrace was quiet, but thunderous in its promise.
Years passed gently. Their home was small, warm, filled with sketches and horse-saddle leather and laughter that lived in gestures. They found themselves surrounded by friends, adopted family, people who valued hearts over voices.
Yet the past never fully vanished. Harlan aged alone, bitterness consuming him like rust. One year word reached Clara that he had fallen ill, that his ranch had withered. Against Elijah's protests, she visited him. She found Harlan weak, pride broken. He stared at her in disbelief. Clara placed her sketchbook on his bedside. Inside was a drawing. Harlan, young, hopeful, holding the ranch at its peak, a better memory than he'd become. Harlan's eyes glistened. For the first time, his lips shaped, "I'm sorry." Clara touched his hand gently. Forgiveness was never spoken, but it was given. When she returned home, the sunset painted her white dress crimson once more, just as it had the day she was taken. But now she stood differently, tall, unbroken, chosen. Years later still, Clara became known far and wide as the silent rose of the frontier. Travelers came to buy her art, inspired by how she captured what words often failed to hold. Elijah's hair silvered, hands calloused from years of ranching, but his eyes remained soft as the day they met. Their love spoke louder than any voice.
As time claimed them gently, like twilight swallowing day, Clara often sat beside Elijah on their porch. They watched the wind ripple through fields, bending wheat like dancers bowing graceful goodbyes.
One final evening, as stars shimmered awake, Elijah leaned his head against hers. Clara signed one final message upon his palm. "Thank you for hearing me when no one else ever tried." Elijah smiled, soft, unwavering. He signed back, Elijah smiled, soft, unwavering. He signed back, "Your silence was the loudest truth I ever knew." And so they stayed. Two silhouettes beneath a blood-red sunset. The deaf frontier bride in her white prairie gown, and the weathered cowboy with the gentle expression, etched into the story of the Wild West forever, not in loud legends carved by gunfire, but in quiet places where hearts speak without sound. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe, like, and leave a comment. Your support helps us continue bringing tales of heartbreak and hope from the Wild West.